A lot of family and friends who have lost a loved one to a cult don't feel like they have a right to feel like a victim or contribute to the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry into cults, fringe groups, and the coercive control methods they use. So I'm making this video/podcast to share some of my story as a parent who's lost their daughter to one of the most destructive cults ever cultivated on Australian soil. They're called the Kidney Cult, led by Dave McKay. The main message I want to get across is that while the voices of direct victim survivors of cults need to be at the centre stage of the inquiry, those of us who may be considered collateral damage also need to have our voices heard. This isn't selfish. It's because the victim survivors need our support, and our insights can help validate everything they say. Just like other marginalised groups, victim survivors need their allies. Some people who leave high control groups are so damaged they cannot speak up for themselves. We can help those people too. I don't know how to summarise everything I want to say, so this is going to be a longish podcast. That's a cue to go put on the kettle and grab a cuppa, because this is going to be a long yarn. I'm going to be baring my soul and speak of things I've never publicly or even privately fully revealed to others. This production discusses cults and coercive control, including descriptions of psychological manipulation, emotional abuse, and death. Some viewers may find this content distressing. Viewer discretion is advised. So before I get into it, I want to mention from here on, I will not mention the name of my daughter's cult or her cult leader's name. It's a Voldemort sort of thing. To say his name feels like giving him power. Besides, I think others will relate more to what I'm saying if he remains nameless. The techniques he uses are common across other groups. It's as though these people are all cut from the same cloth. I also want to mention that I'll be sharing some of my experiences of being face to face in a courtroom with the cult leader who destroyed my relationship with my daughter. I've never publicly shared any of this before, and it's really intense. So my apologies if my voice quivers. This stuff is really difficult to talk about. Okay, let's get started. What is it like to be the parent of a child who has joined a destructive cult? I've been asked this question a few times in the past couple of weeks, and it's a really difficult question to answer. So first of all, I want to dismiss some fallacies and assumptions that some people make when they hear about people in my position. Firstly, the assumption that I must have been a bad parent, or that I must have had a bad relationship with my daughter, which contributed to her joining a cult that has become her surrogate family. No, my relationship with my daughter was good. Before she joined, we communicated with each other nearly every day, despite living in two different states. We shared common interests. We shared things like recipes, articles on topics we were both interested in. We just talked about how our day had been and how we were feeling. For example, she once shared a video of Gabor Mate discussing how parent-child relationships change when the child becomes an adult. And this led to us discussing how our own relationship was changing now that she was in her early 20s. Not many parents have that kind of open communication with their adult kids. My daughter and I, we had our tiffs and conflicts every now and then. But I had raised my child to think critically, express herself, and question the world around her, even if that sometimes meant questioning me. Our bond was real. We would talk about psychology, fashion, health, spirituality, things that mattered to both of us. And that's what made it so heartbreaking when the communication shifted into something else. Our openness turned into suspicion, and when the language she used no longer sounded like hers, it was a very surreal experience. Secondly, I want to challenge the assumption that there must be something wrong with my daughter or that she must be stupid. No, my daughter was an intelligent, gifted young woman. She did well at school and was a high achiever in many subjects, in particular music and speaking other languages. Thirdly, I want to make it clear that my daughter did not have any serious mental health problems. She was just at a vulnerable place in her life. not sure of what she wanted in terms of finding a career and life path. So when the cult showed up and appeared to offer solutions to all life's big problems, she was susceptible. Number 4, that I must be a controlling mother who does not respect my child's right to make her own life choices. No. I always gave my children the space to express themselves and make their own decisions. When my daughter first joined the community, I gave her my full support, and she even thanked me on a number of occasions for being so supportive. Most parents would lose their shit if their child suddenly announced they'd given away all of their possessions and were about to marry someone who was 8 years older than them, whom they'd just met. I've always said my daughter genuinely fell in love with her future husband, and I was genuinely happy for her. I remember what it was like to be young and in love, and how love can do funny things to people. When you're in that state, you never imagine that things aren't going to turn out well. I always viewed my role as a parent as one in which I needed to be supportive, never controlling, which leads on to number 5, which is when everything turned pear-shaped and I was completely cut off from my daughter. I've had people tell me that I did it all wrong, that I should have never criticised the leader. I mean, I get it. That is the standard line cult experts tell family members. We are told we should sit quietly on the outside and remain in contact. This is one of the reasons why parents in situations like mine don't speak up about losing their children to cults. We are told not to rock the boat, to just be tolerant, and to be there when our kids are ready to leave. I've got several problems with this line of advice. To begin with, I did this. For the first 2 years of my daughter's involvement in the cult, I watched her being abused and exploited. I observed her being expected to work long hours for no income. I observed her being under constant surveillance, which included all my private emails to her being read out and shared with everyone else in the community. I observed her emails to me becoming more and more shallow until hard evidence that they were being edited by one of the leaders presented itself in my inbox. I got an email that said, "Hi Tina, this is my email to Renee." I know of other parents who have received the same, and it's been confirmed that all emails going out to family have to go through a screening process. As a parent, I cannot emphasise how chilling it is to receive emails signed by your child, but the content and expression is completely devoid of their personal expression and personality. It is worse than conversing with the chat box. There is none of the usual nuance and intimacy of sharing memories, jokes, and the innuendos that only the two of you know about. That sacred emotional bond between parent and child that was once shared between myself and my daughter was systematically stripped away. I've done a video describing what it's like to be silenced by email surveillance, which you can check out if you'd like to know more details about that. The next problem I have with parents being encouraged to remain silent when they witness their children being recruited into a cult is that this is basically telling parents they need to be ingenuous. It literally got to a point in the situation with myself and my daughter where if I did not speak up, if I did not tell her my concerns about the group, then she would lose respect for me. Our relationship was always one that was based on openness and authenticity. If I continued to provide support for her group, knowing everything that I did, then sooner or later she would resent me for being fake. "But you knew, Mum. You knew I was in a cult. So why didn't you say something?" I'm sure that's what she would say to me. Now, I know some parents are able to successfully maintain relationships with their children who have joined a cult, and this does eventually work out well and helps to lead them out of it. But this does not always work. Some parents never see their children again. So, advising parents to remain quiet and not speak up is not a one-size-fits-all. And it certainly does not address the problem of cults in the first place. A lot of parents have also chosen to remain quiet because they are afraid that speaking out publicly may have negative consequences for their children. I have contemplated that risk myself. And in my particular circumstances, there is no benefit to being complacent. I also know of cult victims who are resentful towards their family for not trying harder to expose the group that they were in. I'm quite certain my daughter would be one of those people. It's a damned if we do, damned if we don't situation. Parents are placed in this impossible situation where we watch from the sidelines as the people we love the most have their beautiful personalities repressed and their freedom and autonomy stripped away by coercive actions and layers of deception. All this goes on while we are demonised by the cult leaders who want complete and utter control over our loved ones. And then there are the people who sympathise with the cult and claim that the victims, like my daughter, are making choices of their own free will. My daughter did not agree to all of this. She agreed to join in a community that she felt resonated with her values and beliefs. She was not told the group's real name or their controversial past before she committed. She was love-bombed, given misleading information, and coerced into committing without any call-off period. And once she joined, there was no easy way out that did not involve some sort of tribulation. For 2 years, I did what the cult experts said to do. I watched silently as things went from bad to worse. If the group was who they said they were, a peaceful Christian community, then I would have never raised any objections. But the issue was, despite how supportive I was, my child was being pulled away from me in what I now understand to be a doctrine of forsaking all. This dogma involves grooming members to be prepared to sacrifice their own lives as martyrs. They are taught that it is them against the world, which is referred to as the system. They are literally told it is better to die for their faith than to trust anyone in the system. The thought that my child may actually do this, sacrifice her own life, just like the leader has told her to do, is absolutely terrifying. How is a parent supposed to react to knowing their child is being groomed for martyrdom? As a society, we are horrified when the media sensationalizes Islamic extremists, but when a Christian does this, our terrorism laws are not enacted. In about 2021, I sent a message to Border Security warning them that the cult leader was grooming people to die of starvation. I sent them links to several videos to support how I'd come to this conclusion. When the news came out 18 months later that a congregation in Kenya had actually starved themselves to death, it did not come as a surprise to me that people over there were linking that group to my daughter's cult. In the weeks that followed, the cult leader posted in a bragging manner about how much he supported those deaths as being an act of righteousness. Hundreds of children died, and here this man was praising the people who allowed this to happen. When he realised that what he had posted could get him into trouble, he deleted that video and all the comments he'd made bragging about his connection to Kenya. He made up a cover story, claiming that he had no connection, and started spreading the rumour that I was making up lies about him. I will not be gaslighted by this man. I've told authorities many times that I am willing to make a formal statement about all that I know about the cult leader's link to Kenya and pass on the screenshots I have. But to date, no authorities have approached me. And I need to add that this man has infiltrated organisations all around the world. While he claims his cult following is small, the real number of people he has influenced with his deadly messages is completely unknown. The possibility that another tragedy, like what happened in Kenya, could happen again is very real. I have email evidence of the cult leader's daughter telling my daughter she must break all of her emotional attachment to me, and my child responded by saying she didn't want to, in order to encourage my child to disattach from me. She was prompted to view me as being evil, someone who is in opposition to their Christian values. The leadership has the upper hand. They have isolated her, sent her to another country, and won't allow her to go anywhere without another member being in close proximity. She can't have a private conversation with me. All our communication is blocked, completely under the control of group leadership. She can't leave and take a break from the group for even a few days, let alone a few weeks. Her daily routine is dictated to her, filled with jobs that promote the dear leader as a saviour. They make money by distributing books, DVDs, and pamphlets on the streets, or making videos on monetarised YouTube channels. They set quotas for how much money they should make each day, and failure to meet these is met with ridicule. The income of this cash industry goes into travel expenses and producing more material. Meanwhile, they eat food out of garbage bins. All this goes on while messages that invoke the fear response are constantly repeated. When people are subjected to constant fear like this, the amygdala, the epicenter of the fight or flight part of the brain, is activated. Creating fear-based environments like this affects the brain in such a way that it means that a person's prefrontal cortex is effectively shut down. In other words, the ability to think critically is impaired. There is no doubt in my mind that if my daughter were allowed to take a break from the group, if she had the opportunity to be in a safe and supportive space where she could examine the dynamics of the community from an outside perspective, she would not return. This is why the cult leader goes to so much effort to convince his followers that the outside world cannot be trusted, and that doing so will lead to eternal damnation. And he especially cannot allow my daughter to spend any unsupervised time with me. I will most probably cut through all of his programming, purely and simply because I love my daughter unconditionally. In order to maintain control over her, he's had to make up lies about me. These lies have effectively destroyed our relationship, which I'll talk about more in a moment. Parents are not responsible for their kids joining cults. These groups are led by narcissistic personalities who want power and control over others. They may talk about faith and religion, but it is always about power and control. My daughter's cult leader has gone out of his way on many occasions to intimidate me into being silent. It all began with him convincing her to call me Renee instead of Mum. He preaches that parents are just a biological coincidence, and then extends the narrative in such a manner that he and his wife take on the role of surrogate parents. This man, this white man, who claims to have a divine authority from God, wants me to accept that my child is no longer my child. He literally wants me to accept my child is gone. My child is not dead, but she has been taken away from me. The relationship I once had with her has been deliberately sabotaged. I am not his first victim. He has been doing this for decades, evading the radar of the law at every turn. This man has mentally and emotionally attacked me in the most insidious and unimaginable ways. I cannot go through every little incident or every little act of manipulation. There's just too much, and it's too personal. So to give a quick insight into how he operates, I'm going to reference this article, which I'll link below, which describes how he created a fake persona with the intention of using it to manipulate the media. I've been on the receiving end of this man playing games like this more times than I can count. I did not invite this man into my life. I want nothing to do with him, but there's nothing I can do to escape. I got a personal safety intervention order out against him, and he's broken this so many times. The police could not locate him, and as far as I know, he's now absconded overseas. I've reported him to authorities again and again, but our justice system is not equipped for this level of manipulation. It's like he's studied the law and knows how to slide through every red tape, every loophole, just like an organised crime syndicate. Mostly, he continually gets away with this behaviour by claiming freedom of religion. But this man lies so much, it's difficult to believe he's a Christian at all. So it is, faced with an impossible situation. A couple of years ago, I found myself resorting to the only course of action available to me. I sued the cult leader for defamation. He had created a slanderous video about me claiming that I worship the devil. Slandering parents in his YouTube videos is a tactic this cult leader has gotten away with many times. It's an intimidation tactic, and it is usually effective in getting parents to back off. Alternatively, he threatens legal action against anyone who speaks critically about him. I cannot tolerate living in a world in which men like this are able to get away with causing so much heartache. He doesn't just do this to families in Australia. The UK, Argentina, the Republic of Czech, every continent around the globe has victims. The grief, the anguish, and the sense of loss of being in this shitful situation is almost impossible to bear. I cry almost every day. I've contemplated suicide, but I will not give the cult leader the satisfaction of completely destroying me. I wake up in the middle of the night with flashbacks and nightmares. What did I do wrong? How could I have avoided all of this? How do I grieve the loss of my child who is still alive? My beautiful child. That dear soul who I cherished from the moment she was born. And I promised myself I would do everything I could to give her the best life possible. And if taking my child away from me was not bad enough, he's attacked my reputation. In Christian circles, accusing someone of worshipping the devil is the worst of the worst. The most heinous insult you could ever give. It would be laughable if it weren't so painful. It's obvious that if this is how far he will go to attack someone outside of his group, the way he treats his actual members is even worse. He invented a process he calls the grievance system, which basically involves members who are accused of wrongdoings being confronted by the rest of the group. They will be told they are too proud, too bitter, or incapable of submitting to God, therefore they must be backsliding. These sessions are basically a form of forced confessions, and I've heard several accounts of members agreeing to things that they did not do simply because they wanted to avoid further punishment, which usually involved being kicked out into the streets in adverse weather conditions with no food, no money, or adequate clothing. Remembering also that members are routinely relocated to countries in which they have no support services and sometimes don't even speak the same language. Ex-members have told me that the fear of these grievance meetings keep them complacent. I got a taste of what these grievance meetings must be like during the trial while the cult leader was cross-examining me. He was self-represented. So many times he tried to put words in my mouth and asked me the same questions over and over again to see if I would give a different response, or if I'd say a phrase he could twist to suit his own agenda. At least during the trial, I had the judge and my barrister there to step in some of the time when he did this. But the members of his cult, they are defenceless, forced into a state of fawning and appeasing the leader, or else they will cop more punishment. As if knowing that he looks at my daughter and sees her as a collection of spare body parts isn't enough. Knowing that she is subjected this kind of psychological and emotional abuse I experienced on the witness stand takes it to a whole new level of what the fuck. He's created a system in which members are trauma bonded. I don't want to live in a world in which this type of enslavement of our children is allowed. On paper, the level of coercion and exploitation of labour used in my daughter's cult should meet the criteria for modern slavery. Alas, freedom of religion means the Australian Federal Police won't go near any cases like this. The argument this man uses to supposedly support the claim that I am a devil worshipper are seeped in propaganda. During the trial, he had 2 big fat books sitting in front of him on the bar table. One was titled Satanic Feminism, and the other was Children of Lucifer. He never directly quoted from these, but it was obvious they were his reference sources. I've never read these books myself, but from the synopsis I've looked at online, they have no bearing on my beliefs in the slightest. Nonetheless, he tried to claim that I was operating by the premises that they described. The underlying message being that any woman who did not submit to male authority was a devil worshipper. When I tried to assert anything about my own interests or education, he attempted to reframe my knowledge as being somehow less than his or evil in some way. I felt like I'd been exported back in time and was in a medieval witch trial. Oh, look, a woman who's thinking for herself. She must be an agent of the devil. It may also be good to add that this man was born in 1944, which means he grew up in an era in which Freudian notions of gender were upheld as plausible. He tried to claim I was a smothering mother who could not let go of the apron strings. What utter rubbish! It is him who is the smothering one. I never kept my child under constant surveillance like he does. I never insisted I read all her private messages or told her who she could or could not associate with. You could not get a clearer example of someone projecting their own negative behaviour onto another. He also belittled my mental health and psychology training. Actually, that was quite a humorous moment in the trial. He read a line from one of my emails to my daughter in which I was telling her about my new job as a community mental health practitioner, to which he said, "Does that mean you're a psychologist?" "No," I replied. "So what does it mean?" he asked. I said it means I am a community mental health practitioner. "But what's your title?" he went on. And I repeated, "I'm a community mental health practitioner," before continuing on to read the next few sentences of the email in which I described my new job role as being someone who supports people with mental health conditions. It was obvious he had no idea of the difference between a psychologist and a mental health worker. This was one of many examples in which he'd pull a few words I'd said in private emails to my child and use them completely out of context. At another point in time, he also tried to suggest that I didn't know as much about psychology as I think I did, and alluded to his own expertise in this area. And you know what? I think he does know a thing or two about psychology, but not the type of ethical-based, trauma-informed psychology that someone like myself has been trained in, that is designed to help people achieve well-being. I think he took a few classes on the topic back in the 60s, an era in which psychoanalysis, a now refuted theory that is no longer central to mainstream training due to its lack of empirical support, was at the forefront of psychology education. Back then, concepts like the Oedipus complex, repression, and dream interpretation were treated as clinical fact, even though much of it was based on anecdotal and speculation rather than rigorous science. It's likely he absorbed just enough jargon to feel authoritative and never developed an updated understanding of the field. On the stand, confronted by this man I loathed, I noticed how his speech had a mesmerizing quality to it. I wondered if he was deliberately trying to apply hypnotic techniques or neuro-linguistic programming. There was something about his language and delivery that indicated he knew exactly what he was trying to achieve. It reminded me of early psychoanalytic methods, where suggestion, authority, and the power of the therapist's voice were underestimated tools of influence cloaked in the language of insight and healing. This kind of subtle influence, where language shapes perception and memory, has a long and troubling history in therapeutic and pseudo-therapeutic context. For instance, back in the 1990s, there was a wave of public concern and media coverage around so-called false memories. People, often during therapy, became convinced they'd experienced traumatic events in childhood, including horrific abuse, and in some cases, elaborate satanic rituals. Many of these memories were later found to be the result of suggestive questioning, guided visualization, or other techniques that blur the line between imagination and reality. And entire communities were swept up in moral panic. I can't help but wonder if this cult leader was inspired by all of this. One thing is for certain, he has encouraged my daughter to reinterpret her childhood in such a way that resulted in her testifying against me in the trial. When I listen to the way this cult leader speaks, the certainty in his voice, the carefully planted implications, the emotional hooks, I can't help but see manipulative mechanisms at play. But I'm an adult, almost 50 years old. I have a much greater capacity to recognise these things than a young person. I suspect he uses a myriad of manipulative techniques on people. It's not always outright coercion, but a slow, calculated shaping of perception. He handed my daughter a new lens through which to view her past, one that reframed my love for her as abuse, concern as control, and anything outside his ideology as evil. Techniques to achieve false memories involve asking leading questions, using assumptive language, and the repetition of questions. He did all of these things while I was on the stand. His manner appeared well practiced, as though he was used to getting people to submit to his point of view by using these techniques. But possibly the most disturbing and potentially damning evidence that indicates he is deliberately using psychological manipulation on his members is his practice of dream interpretation. Members are required to regularly report their dreams to him, and then he assists in determining what they mean. Coincidentally, dream interpretation is a common tactic used to evoke false memories. I do not believe this man has any God-given gift to interpret divine revelations from dream symbolism. I believe he uses groupthink, confirmational bias, and priming techniques that all blend together in a manner that amounts to significant psychological manipulation. What I'm saying here may sound like I'm implying that my daughter is being subjected to brainwashing, but I don't like to phrase it like that. Brainwashing is a contentious term that I try to avoid because I know how vague and unscientific it is. However, there is reliable data to support methods of thought reform, and it is naive and gullible to think that cult leaders do not deliberately use them. They may not wave or watch in front of people's eyes, but they absolutely know how to mess with someone's head. They know how to gaslight and imply ideas in such a way that make people think they're not being influenced by them. A tried and tested means of manipulation is to blend a little bit of truth with fiction. One obscure example of how he did this in the trial was to get my daughter to recall me having a cape when she was younger. Long story short, this was during the great Harry Potter craze. I made a cape as part of a dress-up day for book week at school. I'm a creative person, and I always loved encouraging my children's imagination. Those moments, the memories in which I connected with my child through fantasies of Harry Potter, this man latched onto and tried to turn into something they were not. This is one of the reasons why I like to use the metaphor of Little Red Riding Hood and sometimes put a cape on in my videos. Basically, this is me taking the piss out of the cult leader. As the judge said, wearing a cape does not make someone a devil worshipper. Dressing up as Little Red Riding Hood is me expressing myself in a playful manner, just like I did when my kids were growing up. Besides, Little Red being tricked by a wolf in disguise is the perfect metaphor of how a cult leader operates. They lure people off their paths with temptations of metaphorical pretty flowers, all while scheming to devour their victims. Anyway, getting back to the trial. I was on the stand and I was cross-examined by the cult leader for about 4.5 days. The first 3.5 days largely consisted of him trying to attack my reputation from every angle he could. He even tried to claim that he had not defamed me because I already apparently had a bad reputation. In reality, I've had a successful teaching career for about 25 years, and here this man was, trying to convince the judge I was unrespectable. I am indebted to my dear friends who supported me throughout the trial. You know who you are, who gave testimonies to prove that I am not the person that this cult leader has accused me of being. He twisted everything, all while claiming he was the one being persecuted. Truth is, I never objected to my daughter being in his community because of their faith in Jesus. It was always the horrible behaviour of the cult leader that I objected to. Before I got onto the stand each day, I was an emotional mess. A friend who was supporting me throughout the trial remarked that she was surprised how well I could pull myself together as soon as I took the stand. I put this down to being my experience as a teacher. No matter what was going on in my life, I've learned to hold it all in and put on a brave face. The last day I took the stand was different. This was the day the cult leader was taking direct punches at my personal beliefs. Nowadays, I don't know what I believe. The experience of being subjected to this cult leader's berating has left me almost too afraid to believe anything. I now consider myself to be agnostic. Nothing more, nothing less. I don't pray, I don't meditate, I don't do anything that could remotely be considered spiritual. Whenever I try to pray like I used to, I have this cult leader's voice in my head telling me that what I am doing is wrong. I know I should just block it out. He has no right to judge me like that. But praying like I used to reminds me that the way I used to connect to my understanding of the divine is the reason I am estranged from my daughter. I don't know if that makes sense. None of this makes sense. Before all this mess started, I found solace in things like walking in nature, creating art, or just connecting in quiet stillness to what felt to me like a divine, loving, and nurturing presence in the world. I've explored a lot of Rudolf Steiner's writings, and his framework has informed a lot of how I interpret spirituality. Basically, Rudolf Steiner philosophy can be described as a Christian mysticism. It's a community open to everyone, and I'm bringing this up with full awareness that some people consider Steiner to be a cult, and I've heard stories of people having bad experiences with it. And there is a whole tangent I could go off on how Steiner communities are susceptible to being infiltrated by other cultic groups. However, Steiner himself defies typical cult leader traits like authoritative leadership and using coercive methods to control people. So, in the context of my story and how this cult leader tried, unsuccessfully I must add, to suggest that Steiner philosophy involves worshipping Lucifer or Satan in any way, I can confidently remark that he never suggested anything like that. He was always clear in the messaging that Luciferic influence was negative and that people needed to resist the temptations of falling for the deceptive beauty that he may represent. That can basically be summarised as a warning of falling for wolves in sheep's clothing. Steiner spoke of two types of evil. One he called Lucifer and the other Ahriman. Lucifer represents a seductive pull towards egotism, spiritual pride, and escapism, while Ahriman embodies cold materialism, control, and rigid intellectualism. To follow the Christ impulse, according to Steiner, is to maintain a balance, resisting the extremes of both forces and walking a conscious middle path. The description from the book of Matthew of the path being wide and the gate to salvation being narrow is used as a metaphor to describe the pull between these two extremes of evil. Conceptualizing two types of evil is not Orthodox Christianity, but to me, these types of ideas seem more rational than the standard black or white versions of Christianity that I was raised with within Catholicism. I've done a lot of soul searching throughout my life. I have questioned what I believe, and that has led me to consider a lot of viewpoints. I don't talk about my faith often. I did not raise my children to believe one thing or another, although I did make a point of reading the children's Bible to them when they were younger. I've always considered my faith and belief to be a very personal thing, so I've never tried to enforce my beliefs on others. Having said that, Christianity resonates with me. I went to Catholic schools. I've worked in schools under various Christian denominations. It is part of my identity. But the type of Christianity this cult leader, was prescribing goes against the grain of everything I understand Christianity to be. Australia is supposed to be a place of religious tolerance. I never should have been in a place where I was forced to explain or defend my beliefs. There were no acts of evil that this man could accuse me of. It was purely a theological debate that underpinned the slander that I worship the devil. And by accusing me of having a belief system that was somehow so evil, somehow gave this man the right to cut my child out of my life. So there I was, on the stand, the cult leader accusing me of worshipping the devil. The cult leader knew long before the trial started that my Steiner background involved the recognition of multiple types of evil. But there he was, trying to get me to say that I consciously followed the path of Lucifer. He berated me again and again. If it meant I could see my daughter again, I would have been willing to renounce everything I ever believed. I would have said there was only one devil, or that 2 + 2 = 5, or that the moon is made of cheese. But this wasn't even about the cult leader wanting me to align my beliefs with his. No, ultimately, this had nothing to do with my beliefs at all. It was about him demonising me so as to justify his control over my child. I can barely remember some of the things he said to me on the stand. What I do remember is finally breaking down in tears and sobbing. The path is wide and the gate is narrow. What does that mean? He asked. I repeated. I said the path in between two evils is wide and the gate in between is narrow. He asked me again and again what I meant, and all I could do was just repeat. The path is wide, the gate is narrow. The path is wide and the gate is narrow. These words ring in my head to this day. I've lived my whole life trying to be a good person. I was indoctrinated into Christianity at birth, and while I've questioned its doctrines at length, and I've been open to understanding how other people view spirituality differently, the prospect that I would ever be on a stand in a court of law, sobbing and repeating that Bible verse to prove I did not worship the devil, was something I never imagined in my wildest dreams I would have to endure. The path is wide, and the gate is narrow. There was nothing more I could add, but in between my sobbing I said, I wish I wasn't here. I wish this never happened. I wished if there was any misunderstanding between my daughter and I, she could have just rung me and we could have talked about it. Eventually, the cult leader asked if I followed the middle path. I tried to. I responded. It was such a loaded question, delivered as though he was some sort of spiritual gatekeeper. Who was this man to interrogate my relationship with the divine? How dare he position himself as an authority over my soul, as if he held the keys to spiritual legitimacy? The questioning was finally finished. I left the stand with tears running down my face as they are now, and I muttered, I don't know what I believe anymore. It's true. I do not know what to believe. I knew then, as I know now, the cult leader's berating of my belief system was just a means to an end. He's attacked other parents with different lines. He's accused them of being attempted murderers, neo-Nazis, or just straight-out abusive, controlling parents. He is intelligent insofar as he can peer into people's sensitivities and knows which buttons to press. He does this consciously. He takes notes of members' families, sometimes even making diagrams of their family tree and recording any soft points in relationships that he can weaponize. Make no mistake, this man operates with deliberate intent to harm. This type of abuse is documented in domestic violence when a partner undermines the other's sense of self, often through tactics like gaslighting, guilt-tripping, or exploiting emotional vulnerabilities to maintain control. What I experienced on the stand, for all the world to see, was spiritual abuse in action. Spiritual abuse is a hot potato in the legal sphere. And yeah, that term spiritual abuse is a bit icky, so I understand why people avoid it. But since I'm bearing all here, let's embrace it. What I'm describing is what it looks like in real life. A man who claims divine authority oppressing another. In domestic violence, spiritual abuse is recognised as being a situation in which a person is prevented from practicing their faith. In my context, it was a cult leader who demonised me because my faith was different to theirs. It should probably be recognised that his behaviour is discrimination, but that goddamn freedom of religion is so nuanced that law enforcement really don't understand what to do when it happens right in front of their faces. If that man is capable of being so cruel, so judgmental to someone outside his group simply because they interpret the Bible differently to him, inside a courtroom, I must add, there should be no disputing that he treats everyone inside his group who disagrees with him any differently. In fact, I know he doesn't. This is not religious freedom. It is the exact opposite. I wish the Victorian government's Bill of Basic Human Rights was enough to protect me, but it's not. I miss the days when I could sit in quiet contemplation of my own spirituality. I miss the days when I could talk to my daughter and we could exchange points of view while respecting that we did not see everything eye to eye. I miss the days before the cult leader came into my life and coerced my daughter into believing I didn't love her and that she was no longer my child. I feel as though the level of persecution I've experienced by this cult leader should qualify as a hate crime. But of course it doesn't, because you guessed it. Freedom of religion is apparently a license to hate others. This man has made many videos in which he directly tells his followers that they should hate parents. Let that sink in. This man openly tells people to hate their parents. Then he reinforces this dogma by making up lies about them. Imagine someone posting videos encouraging hatred of an ethnic group. Imagine displaying a swatch sticker and saying all Jews should be hated. If anyone in Victoria did any of these things, our police would take action. But a man can claim to be a Christian and openly encourage people to hate their families for no other reason than they are family. And our law enforcement will do nothing. Because apparently that is freedom of religion. Some Christian lobbyists have tried to claim the Victorian Inquiry is an attack on freedom of religion. I think all those people need to hear my story. These groups, these so-called Christian leaders who use coercive method, are not being persecuted for their beliefs. They are the ones persecuting others. My court case brought into the public arena an example of exactly how this plays out. My pain, my suffering, is now a legal record of how these cult leaders operate. They are not holy people who praise God and all of his creation. They are manipulators who exploit scripture to control, isolate, and emotionally break down their followers. They weaponize faith to strip people of autonomy, to silence dissent, and to shield themselves from scrutiny behind a veil of religious authority. Every day, I live in hope that my daughter will get out of the cult. Every day, I live in despair that I may never see her again. Cult leaders like the one who've engulfed my child are not noble representatives of religion who are having their freedoms infringed upon. Freedom of religion should never be a green light for abuse. This man could not even prove in a court of law that it was his honest opinion that I worship the devil. Let's think about that a little bit more. This man could not stand and say, as a Christian, he believes that anyone who does not follow his belief system is a devil worshipper. In fact, he did not give any testimony at all. When the judge asked him if he wanted to say an affirmation or swear on the Bible, he said he wanted to do neither and requested the right to say his own statement. Specifically, he said he could not promise to tell the whole truth, therefore it would not be honest for him to claim that he would. It was plain for everyone in the courtroom to see that this theatrics was just an excuse to avoid being questioned. In her final judgment, the judge declared he was a malicious liar. As strange as it may sound, I really needed to hear that, officially and publicly, that I was not a devil worshipper. After years of being tormented by the cult leader, some of his accusations had started to seep in, like an invisible poison that seeped into my sense of self-worth. Even though I knew what he was saying about me wasn't true, the constant repetition caused me to disconnect with my inner self. The verdict wasn't just a legal win. It was a moment of truth that helped me to feel safe to be me again. How many other cult leaders are out there making up lies, accusing anyone who opposes them of being Satanists, abusing the people they recruit, tormenting the children born into their community, and devastating those on the outside who are powerless to help. My daughter may not be in a space where she's able to see the manipulation that is going on all around her, but I hope the rest of the world can. I really do not want to live in a world where people like this are allowed to get away with causing so much harm. This is why the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry is so important. It's a golden opportunity for anyone who's been impacted by a cult or fringe group to share their stories. While the stories of victim survivors are vitally important, so too are those who've experienced collateral damage. To the friends and families of those who have been tormented, condemned, and persecuted by these groups, please know you are not alone. We should not be made to feel like we are the ones who did something wrong. The responsibility and accountability needs to be placed firmly on the shoulders of those, like my daughter's cult leader, who are using coercive control tactics. Our loved ones need us to speak up. Victim survivors need our support. We are witnesses, and we are victims in our own right. Seeing the light of my daughter's eyes dimmed, her personality repressed, and her bubbly disposition replaced with all the fears the cult leader has installed in her, fills me with a grief that is indescribable. He hasn't just taken her away, he's absconded her best qualities, her compassion, her idealism, and her innate gifts, and is using them for his own selfish agenda. I want my daughter to be free. In nerdy psychological terms, I want her to be in a safe space where her amygdala is not constantly reacting to danger. I want her to be able to access her prefrontal cortex again, that place that not only allows her critical thinking, but permits her to be herself. I want to call out to all those parents who had internalized messages that losing their loved one was in some way their fault, or that speaking out will do more harm than good. This inquiry is a safe space in which you can report your experiences anonymously. You don't have to do so publicly like I am. And I know for many people, it is too risky to openly oppose a cult. You can request for your submission to be kept confidential, which means it will only be read by a small group of a dozen or so people. And parliamentary privilege means that you cannot be sued for defamation, a threat that many cult leaders like to use against anyone who speaks out against them. And so to end, I want to say it again. I do not want to live in a world in which there are no repercussions for cult leaders who systematically manipulate and control us and our loved ones. Currently, there are no legislations in place to adequately address this behaviour. There seems to be loopholes everywhere for them to slip through. Criminal law, business law, fair work, workplace health and safety, domestic violence, slavery, you name it. Freedom of religion is used as an excuse to turn a blind eye to insidious behaviours we do not tolerate in any other aspect of society. Together we can make a difference. We can blow a hole in the smokescreen and show everyone what these cult leaders are really like. And hopefully, if enough people speak out, we can prevent more victims from enduring the hell these cult leaders unleash on the world. And to the friends and family members who have lost a loved one to these coercive groups, please know you are genuine victims too. We did not do anything wrong, and our loved ones need our support. What we've seen and witnessed from the outside are important insights that the inquiry needs to hear. If you need support putting together a submission, please reach out. Myself and others are working behind the scenes to support the process. Thank you for listening.